First thing you want to do is kill the power. Disconnect it, unplug it, whatever means you have. Next, you're going to remove the bracket bolt and the front bolt that holds the motor. This does have a lock nut, so you will be required to hold the bolt from the bottom as well. Okay, remove the bolt, remove the ground wire, set to the side. Disconnect the blue wire from the switch bracket. Replace later. Allen wrench and remove or loosen the set screw to remove the cam from the motor. There's two set screws that hold the lock collar in the back. Loosen both of those. These are also 1/8 inch Allen. Now you remove the other two bolts that secure the motor. Again, you'll be necessary to hold the bottom of the bolt while you loosen the nut on the top. These are 7/16. And now before you want to pull the motor completely out, we want to cut the yellow wire approximately midway so it can be spliced together with the new motor installation. Now probably best to just pull all the wires that go with the motor, pull them up so that they all come out with the motor. You'll have a yellow, you should have a blue, and then you'll have a black and red that are tied together. Now just remove the motor by pulling outward from the back wall out of the coupling. Alright, prior to installation of the replacement motor, be sure to put grease, or in this case anti-seize, on the shaft such that the corrosion would not bind the motor to the couplings. If it has to be replaced later, it can be removed. The motor does have a key on the end of it that must line up with the coupler in the back. It will be necessary to rotate the crank to line up with the key. Basically line your motor with the holes in the box, with the holes in the frame. Maybe easiest to install the front bolt first, and then maybe we'll come to the second bolt here. That way it'll keep everything lined up before we try to put in the more difficult bolt in the back. Okay, with the replacement motor, you will get a new bracket and switch assembly. Assemble the switch to the bracket as you see shown here. In some cases it may be pre-assembled, in some cases it may not, and the nuts and the bolts will be loose packed. Pre-assemble it in this manner first, and now install this over the bolt in the front. Okay, now before this bolt is secured, we'll need to install our ground wires. And then also we have a motor lead ground. One thing to take note, there's two wires that look very similar to each other. In some cases, the ground wire will be a yellow with a green stripe. Do not confuse this with the solid yellow wire. Other cases, this wire may be green with a yellow stripe, so it would be easier to tell apart, but in this case here, this is a yellow with green. We will need to install a ring terminal to this wire and put it underneath this bolt here prior to tightening that bolt. You'll need a ring terminal suitable for 14 to 16 gauge wire and suitable for a 1/4 inch size stud. With the new motor installed, you will have a start capacitor. It can be laid down in the case here out of the way. Some new purchases with the start capacitor will actually be in the holder standing vertically, but laying down in the box is sufficient. And then put the washer and the nut in place. Now that all the bolts are installed, now you can proceed to tighten them up. Make sure there's no wires that's gotten under the motor or being pinched by a washer or anything. Make sure everything's pulled out of the way. Next thing you want to do now is transfer these wires to that switch.
Okay.
And we'll connect them in the same manner. When I say the same manner, they should be labeled common and normally closed. Just put the same color back to the same labeling on the wire. See that? All you need to do is identify one of the two. But now the black wire from the motor will connect to the common side of the switch, which were the remaining terminal. You will be required to put a 1/4 inch fast on terminal on the end of it. Just because of this crimping. Slide the switch up where you can get it plugged in. It is a tight fit, but once it's plugged in, it clears the motor. Now we reinstall the cam. It may be necessary to pull up on the switch or just rotate it till there's a gap or clearance you can slide it on. Next, you're going to strip the end of the yellow wire that was cut and then wire these two wires back together. Probably place the wires in the kind of out of the way and route wires where everything's kind of safe from anything that's rotating. Now the setting of the cams, this being an example of being a float activated flush tank system. So when the float is hanging vertically, it's off, but anytime when water fills and it lays horizontally, it will trigger the system to flush. And at that point, we want to adjust the stop point of the motor when the cam shaft are straight up in the full flushed and open position. So next, after the cam has been placed in position, we need to tighten up this switch prior to adjustment. Cam is still loose, so it can be rotated. We want to rotate the cam to high and push the switch down till you hear a click. So that way you hear a click coming off the rise, you hear a click coming on the rise. So once we get it in position, tighten the nuts that hold the screw and just verify that you hear a click as you rotate to a high spot. At this point, we'll tighten down this switch. Okay, now we're going to go through the fine tuning or final adjustment of the cam relative to the crankshaft. First of all, you'll want to make sure you have enough time on the timer. Maybe set the timer to around 36 seconds. That will be a sufficient time to make sure the crank has enough time to get around. Previously, we installed the cam just to set the height of the switch. Now we're going to remove the cam so we can set the timing. Remove the cam. Turn your power on until the crankshaft is in the full downward position. Now the crankshaft is in downward position, and reinstall the cam with the lobe portion of the cam inward. Rotate till you just hear the click. It's easiest to install the cam with the larger or the high step of the lobe downward away from the switch. Makes it easy to slide on. Rotate it into the switch till you hear it click. And now you can tighten up the cam. We want to verify the setting. Flip on the power switch. Now it will require you to use the float to activate. The first stop point should be directly straight up. You can wait for the timer to time out, or you can also adjust it down somewhat. They'll go ahead and make it activate, and it will stop all the way down. If the crank is not in the proper down position, you can fine tune by disconnecting the power, loosen the cam slightly. If the crank were to go past the downward position, rotate the cam just slightly clockwise, about 1/8 of an inch. If the crank were to come up short of the full downward position, rotate the cam slightly counterclockwise, and then retighten. Set your time on your time delay switch here to about 30 seconds or whatever the original time was set. That time is equivalent to how long it takes the flush tank to fully drain of water. Typically that's going to be around 30 to 36 seconds. The next thing is what can we do with as far as preventive maintenance and keeping the system running sufficiently for a long time. One of the biggest enemies of this system is corrosion, especially in the atmosphere and the environment that this thing is located. Leaks, water leaks, gas leaks, all can basically take its toll inside of the enclosure. One thing with the motor shaft, either apply sufficient grease or anti-seize on the shaft right up to the motor. This will help keep rust from accumulating and getting in and basically tearing out the front seal of the motor. Always properly fuse the box. It's set up for a 2-amp fuse. Oftentimes these are jumped out or removed. If you must, replace the fuse box to make sure it's properly fused. With the new motor installed, you will have a start capacitor. It can be laid down in the case here out of the way. Some new purchases with the start capacitor will actually be in the holder standing vertically, but laying down the box is sufficient. In some cases you may have to replace in times as far as the time delay relay. In some double flush systems you will have also an alternating relay where basically it will have LEDs indicating which side is flushing and which side is activated. They basically alternate from one side to the other. And during installation, or if you want to verify something, one of the biggest issues that can be missed is the plunger depth. Newer flush tank systems does have an instruction decal on the lid. Kind of go over that very briefly. Basically the intent is the plungers should be set 90 degrees to the crank, and the plungers themselves in the sleeve should be set at the top of the plunger should be set just below the bottom of the slot, no more than 1/8 of an inch. Plunger being too deep into the sleeve will cause it to have basically overload the motor and could cause failure. There are other information relative to adjustment on this decal, as we've already talked about fine tuning relative to adjustment of the cam. Keep the box in good shape. I know oftentimes the outlet hole becomes damaged or gets drilled out due to a seized up motor, but try to keep the box as sealed as possible to keep the moisture and keep the gases from the flush tank from entering the box. Make sure the latches and the gasket and the hinges are still in good shape.